What's up, everybody? Welcome to the second episode of the One-Offs here on PLD Projects. I am your host, PLD, and this is the podcast where I invite a guest on who has a very big, strong passion for something, and something that I actually can handle a conversation with. That's why you'll never see like my wife talking about The Crown or anything, because I'm not going to be able to hold that side of the conversation up at all. But Van Halen, I can. Van Halen, one of the greatest rock bands of all time. If you saw last month's episode, I should say, we're monthly. Time is but a construct. Last month, you saw Matty Gunner, myself, Ken Knapsack talking about Oasis, about two brothers who forced a bond that was definitely broken by the end of their run. They hate each other, made great music. Well, this week we're going to talk about a band that also has two brothers in it, but they had a lot of love, maybe a lot of hate for everybody else at some point. But mainly between them, it was love, and that's all that needs to be said. And there's only one person that I could think of to bring on as a guest to speak about the mighty Van Halen. It is actually someone who, when I talk to, when I look at, when I met, I have always just likened him to Van Halen. His logo is Van Halen. His life is Van Halen, it feels like sometimes. He's got great pictures from the Hard Rock Cafe with Van Halen, and he was backstage seeing some gear from Van Halen. I'm jealous. Well, let's bring him on. My good friend, Mr. Mark Ellis.
You know, it is such a compliment to hear, not just from you, but I hear from a lot of people, like they're just driving around town and they hear Van Halen and they're like, yeah, you know, I heard Panama or I heard Right Now. And I thought of Ellis and I'm like, God, I'm sorry that I've done that to people. I'm sorry that I've made myself so synonymous with this eponymous rock band. But I will say, you told me about the show, and I'm thrilled that one of my good friends and a talent like yours is finally getting out there in the world and showing people what you can do in a format that gets to celebrate rock music. As bummed as I was that you told me, Mark, we can't talk about the show The Crown, then I said, well, I guess I'll pivot and we'll just go to the kings of rock and roll. That would be the mighty Van Halen.
Absolutely. And I know exactly how you feel. Obviously, my band Queen, that's the same. I do the same way. I have people all the time yelling at me like, oh God, did you that? I saw Queen on there. I saw Paul Rogers. He was talking like Queen. Oh my God, I thought of you. I'm like, hey, I know. I also apologize, but I love it.
You know, it's one of those things where I think with Queen a little bit too, with at least with their live records with Paul and and later on with Adam, it's like there's different eras of rock bands, but when they can maintain not necessarily the creative juices, but just the overall kick-assedness of what they were when we fell in love with them, and they can still perform like that decades later. I mean, we just saw Aerosmith retire after 50 plus years of touring, and by all accounts, when they were touring with the Black Crowes earlier last year, they were just as good as they've ever been. And then, Steven's voice just can't hold up anymore. And when you listen to Aerosmith, when you listen to any Aerosmith record, as far back as Dream On, you're like, how the hell is that guy's voice going to survive another album?
My throat bleeds when I listen to him sing sometimes. Yeah. I'm like, oh my God, absolutely same way. Luckily, I got to see him a few years back. And I'm grateful for that. I saw them a bunch of times back in the 80s and 90s. So I'm glad I got to see them one more time. The worst thing about that to me is they didn't get to end it on their terms, having a final gig, final surround. But you know what? 50 years is something to be 50 plus years, something to be very proud of in this industry, especially. And they always maintain that quality as well, just like Van Halen did, just like Queen did. Yeah. And Van Halen today, of course, this is actually a testament to them because of all the different strife and tournament that they went through, turmoil that they went through. At the end, even if they weren't creating they weren't doing an album a year, or an album every 2 years like they used to. They didn't do many albums after Van Halen 3. Only did the one studio album. But yet, when you all saw them live, you still got that same energy. You still got that same feel, and they still love the music. And that's all that really matters. When you build up that catalog and you can perform it at that level and consistently do it until the end, there's something to be said about that. And that's why I'm so happy to be able to talk Van Halen with you today, because, man, they are the best, the kings of rock and roll, the mighty Van Halen. Let's start off. Let's say off quickly, if anybody doesn't know who Van Halen is, and that's really kind of very sad if you don't. I'm going to say that right out loud. Be ashamed of yourself. It's okay. You can learn a little bit.
It's okay. We're here to help.
We are here to help.
Educate.
They sold over 80 million records worldwide. They're the 19th highest selling act of all time. Of course, the 70s were such a fertile time for rock and roll. I want to say, I don't want to be those guys. I don't want to be that guy that says, back in my day, music was better, music, blah, 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 blah. But I think that time was such a fertile time for bands to discover themselves. They had this chance to really kind of tour. There was none of this, like, you give me a hit single today or you're gone tomorrow kind of thing. This is a band who had like 4 or 5 years of touring before they even got their first album out. And that showed in their musicianship. When people like Gene Simmons are going, oh, see how excited my dog has got it already? I'm telling you, this happened. He's excited about Van Halen.
Molly gets excited about Van Halen too, and I have a video. When this gets released, I'll release the video too of the very first Schmoedown Spectacular we did, and we taped it in studio at Collider Studios, and I got home and I was in my Tetris suit after filming, however matches all day. Then we go to Barney's and drink our faces off. And then I came home and Molly was so excited to see Poppy. Running with the Devil was playing in the background because I got home and I had a couple more beers and I was obviously when you're, doing that, you got to listen to Van Halen. And I played Running with the Devil and she could not contain herself. She was licking my face. She could not stop licking my face. And Running with the Devil, you can faintly hear in the background. And it was just, I'm smiling. She's having a great time. And it's the pure joy of Van Halen.
That's Van Halen in a nutshell. I mean, so Gene Simmons gets to hear them, starts really pushing them towards a contract. Of course, eventually Ted Templeman gets a hold of them. And we have this great debut album that sold over 10 million records. And I got to tell you, I don't know about you, I think you'll agree with me on this, that the debut album by Van Halen is one of the most perfect albums of all time. Like, it seems like it just like you have those albums where front to back, there's not a filler track really on it. Every single song hits you like a ton of bricks, and it deserves its standing in the greatest rock and roll records of all time.
I mean, you talk about the great debut albums in rock history, and you can put that conversation aside because it doesn't matter if this was their rookie effort or not. It's one of the great albums of all time. I mean, you talk about the debuts, it's up there, I think, neck and neck, and you can have the argument whether it's that or Appetite. I'd also put Boston's first album in there too, where every track is just a monster. You still hear it on the radio, but there's just something that is so youthful and energetic and timeless about that first album. It's leaping out of the speakers, jumping for joy that your eardrums get to celebrate this.
Absolutely. And it kind of went through the 90s too. You got to talk about Pearl Jam, had a great debut record as well.
Yeah.
Kind of Nirvana. Obviously, great records like that. But this is, like I said, is really up there. And then they followed it up with solid album after solid album. Now, it wasn't quite the smash hit the first one was, but David Lee Roth really took them through an era where it was a guitar hero band. Eddie obviously being a legend. I mean, let's talk about the legend himself. Probably the greatest guitar player of all time, I think. I mean, there's a couple up there you could throw up there. You could throw Jimi Hendrix up there potentially. You could throw up, some people love Jimmy Page, some people like Stevie Ray Vaughan from the blues. But note for note, there's something special about Eddie's musicianship along with his guitar that kind of puts him on top for me. What do you think?
Most imitated guitar player of all time. And
absolutely.
The one that you can imitate and you can learn all the licks and you can learn the style and you can learn all the tricks and all the hammer-ons and all that stuff. And you can tell, your ears can separate whether it's somebody who's a great guitar player versus Eddie Van Halen. And what's amazing is to see that transferred live too. It's not just like this studio wizardry that they were doing. This was just a guy plugging in. And one of my favorite stories is early on in their career, Ted Nugent had heard about this hotshot guitar player, Van Halen, and they were on tour. Maybe they're doing a festival together or something. And he hears Eddie warming up and playing, whatever during sound check. And he's like, there's no way that guy can sound that good like that. So Nugent, in all of his Tedness, asks Eddie to unplug from his rig. And he says, here, plug into my rig and let's see how you sound. And he plugged into Nugent's rig and used Nugent's guitar, and it still sounded like Eddie.
That's amazing.
And Ted is an incredible guitar player in his own right.
Absolutely. And another great guitarist, Joe Satriani. Love Satriani. I got to see Sammy Hagar last a couple weeks ago now during their Best of All Worlds tour.
You saw already?
I did. I had a blast. I had an absolute blast. And I got to tell you, listening to Joe do it, he doesn't sound like he's doing the same riffs. He's doing the same feel. It doesn't sound like Eddie. It's still very good, and it's still worth the price of admission, let me tell you. But yeah, that was Sammy did a wonderful job at 76. This guy is still pushing it and still got the pipes. I can imagine that. It's actually a great concert. And a little sidebar for all you there. It was a great night at Saratoga's back. Saratoga Winners up here, winning concert venue up north from me for about 40 minutes away, half an hour away. And the next night was Train and REO Speedwagon. So they were in town. So at the end of the gig, both Kevin Cronin, lead singer of REO Speedwagon, and Train's, I forget his name, Pat Moynihan, he came out and they did When It's Love at the finale. And Pat also did Right Now with him. It was a great combo. It was just such a fun night. You just put your cares aside. And this is what it actually stoked me of Van Halen, because that's what Van Halen was. Some people are political. Some people are, it's like about serious musicianship. Van Halen was serious about the musicianship, but the atmosphere was, we're going to have a good time. You're going to have some Jack Daniels. You're going to party. You're going to sway. You're going to sing with us. You're all going to have like such a celebratory kind of feel. And that's what I love about them.
And I think that's one of the reasons why, as much as the brothers were all about the music and the creation of this sound, you did have these other ingredients that were essential to making the product that became Van Halen, and the reason why we love them so much. It starts for me with Eddie and Alex, but you can't tell the story or even enjoy Van Halen as much as we do without the other elements that were contributing to it, with the various lead singers and Mikey and later Wolfgang. And, it's all part of this big cocktail that, you and I just drink all the time.
Absolutely. Happily get drunk on Van Halen for sure. I will second that. We are all three. We love all three eras of Van Halen. We've mentioned that before. We are one of the few. There's a lot of, if you go into Facebook groups, it's not a good time. It's all about who's David versus Sammy still after all these years. I'm kind of like, give it up, guys, give it up. It's all Van Halen. That's all you need to know. But I want to especially point out right at the beginning here how important Mike Anthony is, because I feel sometimes he gets lost in the shuffle a little bit. But man, his backing vocals were the secret sauce about Van Halen. I think there was something about those high notes that he hit live in concert. Even today, he sounded, Sammy, I told you, Sammy hit the notes. He was a little straining, a little 76. You can tell he's aged a little bit, but still really prime. Michael sounds like he was in 1973 still. I don't know how he does it with the Jack Daniels he drinks and everything else, but he was on fire singing, talking about love. Oh my God, it was brilliant.
Yeah, his sound more than anything else with Van Halen is why I kind of look at them as like a hard rock Beach Boys. It's his sort of the sunshiny vocals that he brings to it. It sounds happy. It sounds joyful. It sounds youthful. It sounds innocent. It's exuberant. It's just you're so excited to be there. That's what his voice sounds like. And when that marries with Eddie's and Dave's, and particularly with Dave's, it's just like this. We're having such a good time. It transports you to those famous backyard parties that they used to have in Pasadena before they blew up and became the worldwide phenomenon.
Oh, absolutely, 100%. And I got to say, you talking about his voice, actually, that's exactly a description of him. Youthful, innocent, very loving, and I say, I will give him all the credit in the world throughout the turmoil that happened. And you could say that he could possibly have a grudge if he was somebody else. Even when he left Van Halen and the Wolfgang Can, I never heard him say a bad word about anybody. Class act all the way through. He would never say anything bad about anybody. Dave, Sammy, Gary, he always loved them. And in fact, I actually give shout out to Michael, because at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame induction, even though Gary didn't really make it as part of Van Halen, because he had an album and a tour, I understood that, but he still name checked him after the fact that Gary was gone, and that was kind of like, that's Mike Anthony in a nutshell for you. You love the guy.
It's still an alumni thing, and when you hear interviews with Eddie, him and Mikey got pretty strained at various points, particularly in the 2000s with various reasons, but. Right. I think that Eddie had this. He had this kind of this cool thing about the guys that you started with, and it's like whatever. It was almost like I can make fun of my family, but nobody else can, sort of thing. And so even though he would, have flirtations with other guys, like who maybe you should be in our band instead of Mikey, and all these things. It's like at the end of the day, if anybody else came after Mike, Eddie's like, no, he's in the band. And that's all that mattered. He's in our band, and he was there when it started, so he's a band member.
And that actually tops it. I mean, actually, Eddie obviously tragically passing away in 2020, but there were things that came out afterwards. How Eddie was trying to plan a kitchen sink type tour with everyone involved. I'm not sure how that would have worked with the kind of the little bit of egos we got going on in the band, but having David, Mike, Gary, Sammy, all in like one big show, how awesome would that have been? I mean, come on now.
It would have been nuts. I don't know that it ever could have happened with Dave, but even if they just got together for one farewell tour and it was just the original 4 guys, that would have been wonderful. And then you would hope that they would be able to figure something out where it'd be Dave and Sammy, and then based on whatever town they're in, if Gary's close by, come on down, do a set. Let's bring some. Hey guys, Gene Simmons is here and wants to come up and do Love Gun. You know, like whoever was any part of the history of this band, bring them on stage.
Do it for the hell of it. Absolutely. That's the kind of atmosphere you like in a band. You loving that in the band. Now let's talk about you first of all. Now it's a nice time to insert. Where did you first come into Van Halen? What was your like first memories of falling in love with this band?
I first came across Van Halen on, various MTV sort of, shows and watching the videos and stuff like that. You would see they were just kind of around, and I was born in 80. And so I didn't really become aware of them until after Roth had already left the band. So even though Sammy was in the band, I think the first video I probably saw was Jump, because it was probably a little before For Unlawful Carnal Knowledge came out. And I remember having a Walkman and loving the Walkman and having the 1984 tape with that just cooler than cool cover of the angel baby smoking a cigarette. And just thinking how cool that was. And so I just wore that tape out, particularly the first side that goes 1984 into Jump. And that's how I listened to it back in the day. That's how if I was listening to Jump, I was also listening to 1984 because it was even today, it sounds like such a futuristic intro. And for whatever reason, the movie Free Jack with Emilio Estevez
and Mick Jagger.
It was being advertised a lot on TV right when I first discovered Van Halen. And that 1984 intro felt like it was a futuristic kind of thing. And Free Jack was about this race car driver who gets sucked into the future through a billboard. And I'm like, again, I was a Young Guns guy. And so I'm like, that's Emilio Estevez. And so I remember thinking like 1984 would be great music for Free Jack. And those two are just intertwined permanently in my head. But it's just this really great kind of preparation for this new era, so to speak, of Van Halen that was going to be relying more on keyboards and stuff like that, despite Diamond Dave's initial hesitancy with that.
Right.
Then you hear Jump and it's like, you can't help but be attracted to that song. It is simply irresistible. And from there, I became a Van Halen fan. And then I remember I was in college and I was driving home from North Carolina back to Virginia. I just finished summer school because I needed it. And I was driving home. And by this point in my career, I had graduated from Walkman to Discman. And Discman had that cassette tape you would put into your car's cassette tape that was connected with a cord to the Discman, and it skipped a lot. It skipped a lot. And I was driving home, and I remember I got lost, and we didn't have GPS back then, so you're looking at the good old map, and I got pretty lost in the backwoods of North Carolina, Virginia border. And I remember thinking, I don't care, because I'm driving on an open highway. It's summertime. And I'm listening to the Greatest Hits Volume 1. That CD is what was in there. And so I had it just blasting both eras. And I remember just it dawning on me, I think this is my favorite band, because I had become a big classic rock fan through high school with, Zeppelin and Aerosmith and Skynyrd and stuff like that. And I was coming out of where I thought my musical taste should be, which was the music of the time in the early 90s when I was in junior high. So I was coming out of all the Nirvana and Alice in Chains and Screaming Trees, Smashing Pumpkins, all that stuff, music that I still like and appreciate. But I started to find myself drifting more back in time to classic rock when I got into high school. And then just landing on Van Halen seemed right, because I couldn't believe anybody could play guitar like that. Not just the speed, not just the licks, not just the riffs, but it was just the way that it felt like magic, and it felt like it was just entering your body, and it was just so celebratory to me. And they just had so many great songs that you could sing along to, that you could air guitar to, and it was just the perfect band then. And when I was lost and didn't know where I was going, And it's the perfect band now because I can put those records on and they still make me feel like that college kid who had the whole world in front of him.
Right. You know, it's fun. I actually feel a lot like you do. I'm a little bit older, born in '76, so I've got a couple years on you. But I went through some similar things, and I actually think I came to Van Halen a little bit later than you did. Funnily enough, I kind of through the '80s. I was a kid. My first cassette tapes that my father got me, my parents got me for Christmas, were like Twisted Sister and Bruce Springsteen's Born in the USA. So I loved them. I loved music at that point, but I never had a band. My first band, which I said, you know, when you hear everybody has those my bands. My first band was actually Extreme. When Extreme came out, I kind of, it was like a not the most popular. Nobody was in like they were loved a little bit for their More Than Words, obviously.
Right.
But as far as like big acts, they weren't the biggest act ever. And I think that's what I liked about them. It was kind of like my niche. This is my band, you know, this is that lower key kind of stuff. And I loved Extreme.
Hey man, Extreme's my band, and if you don't like what you're hearing, get the funk out.
Exactly. Speaking of Van Halen worshippers, I mean, Gary Sharon was on Gary and Nuno were on Sammy Hagar's show a couple years ago. He did this TV show where we went around, and Gary and Nuno both said that Extreme they consider Extreme to be the bastard child of Queen, Aerosmith, and Van Halen. And it pretty much is what it is if you look at them. Nuno is probably one of the only ones I could think that could be maybe in that reign of Van Halen-esque kind of a guitarist. Actually, in fact, it was kind of funny. Remember after Eddie passed, some people were trying to like make Nuno like the heir apparent, and it was like, no. There's only one. I'm like, if you're even talking about me the same thing, I think you thank you, but no thank you.
Yeah, nobody needs that smoke attached to him, you know.
Please no. But he always used to celebrate with them, of course. He still plays songs to this day. Extreme went out on tour and did a lot of Van Halen licks and guitar solos, and Gary would him and do some stuff. But either way, Extreme was mine band for a bit. And Extreme kind of led me to classic rock for a bit as well, because when Extreme played the Freddie Mercury tribute concert, that's kind of one of those nuts and bolts that got me to Queen. But I went through Queen. I had actually seen Van Halen a few times. As a kid, I didn't see them in concert, but I had seen Jump in Panama, of course, on the MTV when it first came out. Everybody was watching MTV. Loved it, but didn't really hook onto it yet. I actually saw them for the Full Carnal Knowledge tour. Loved the band live again and loved it, but never really went back. I went and started listening to the greatest hits. I was a radio guy. Every time they came out with a hit single, I knew it, loved it, never went to the back of the deeper cuts. It wasn't, of course, until the famous third era of Van Halen when Gary Sharon, my boy from Extreme, joins Van Halen. And I was like, well, they're going to tour together. I better just go listen to all the Van Halen I could listen to and really win. And then what a joy that was, discovering everything about it. And I remember hearing, because I never saw any of the David Lee Roth stuff live, because Sammy famously only did like Panama or Jump. He might do Ain't Talking About Love, or You Really Got Me, which is a King song anyway. But I knew Gary's famous. The best thing about Gary's tour, even though he was people are hesitant on, a third lead singer. But he was like coming out. I was like, no, I'm going to do every era of Van Halen. If I'm going to sing Van Halen, I'm going to sing all the David songs, all the Sammy songs. And I was like, that's awesome. Which is why, to me, I'll argue, I think the Van Halen 3 tour was probably my favorite tour as far as set list goes, because there were just so many from every single era.
I remember seeing that on MTV. I think they were live in Australia, kicking off the tour, and it was on MTV. And this was before they were like, knighted as my favorite band of all time. But
right.
You're right. You might be the only guy who Van Halen 3 is the one that got them into Van Halen.
Right.
But, I remember seeing that and being like, what is this? Somebody get me a Doctor song. This seems pretty cool. But it's so funny how you're right, because I can be driving home from college and be listening to Greatest Hits Volume 1 and hear all those classic songs that we're going to hear 100 years from now.
Right.
But it's once you get beneath, once you go diver down, and you go below skin deep with the band, you continue to hear all this stuff, and you're like, holy crap, this vault is endless, and the nuggets are just as delicious on the bottom as they are on the top. And now it's like, holy crap. I mean, I thought Panama was my favorite song. What the hell is this Romeo Delight thing? What the hell is this Secrets about? This little guitars, this is incredible.
I'm the one. What is this? Oh, I love it.
Yeah.
Love this stuff. Exactly the same. That's how it happened to me. So I went back, I went through, loved it. They became one of my secondary bands at that point for sure. And now I was a lifelong relationship at that point. I had already seen Van Halen and Sammy a couple of times. I saw them on the 3 tour with Gary 3 or 4 times. Actually, I went around quite a few times. I loved it. And that was it for me. The rest of the time, I was loving both eras of Van Halen. And I did find it interesting for me. I got to say, you just talked about it briefly, so I want to kind of come back to it. obviously the first a bunch of Van Halen albums were very much guitar driven, rock and roll, pure rock. And then like in the 80s come along, Eddie really wanted to expand. And they got the keyboards in there, the pianos in there. Dave was a little hesitant on it. And of course, that was part of the reason I've heard, maybe that could be wrong, part of one of the schisms that David's like, I don't really want to do this. And that's why one of the reasons they left. And when Sammy came in, they definitely continued along those lines, being a little bit more, whereas David was like a hard rock band, with Sammy, they kind of touched a little bit more on that pop metal kind of stuff. A little more poppier. Still had that hard rock. I mean, there's still some songs in there like AFU and but they still have those hard rock sensibilities, but definitely a little bit more on the poppier side. Did you like that change? Did you like seeing more of that, or are you more of that David purist as far as the hard rock section goes?
Yeah, it's like anytime you have Star Wars fans that they don't want to talk Star Wars because they don't want to get, or if you, God forbid, somebody brings up politics at the dinner table and it's like, oh, now we're gonna have to pick sides, and it's people hear Van Halen, they always ask, well, are you Dave or Sammy? And I'm like, I'm both. First of all, I think that Van Halen with David Lee Roth is the greatest party you've ever been to. And Van Halen with Sammy Hagar is the greatest vacation you've ever been on, where it's a little mellower, but it can still kick your ass and you can have a great time at any moment. It's not out of the realm of possibility for me to compare Van Halen to Michael Jordan. And Michael Jordan, when his first run with the Bulls, before he went on hiatus to play baseball, he was the high-flying Air Jordan dunk over you. And then when he came back, he was a little bit older. He was a little bit wiser. He could still jump and dunk over you when he needed to, but he also perfected his mid-range game and that fadeaway jumper that we saw. So it wasn't quite as highlight-driven as maybe his early years were, but he could still beat you just as bad as he always could. So I look at those two eras of Michael Jordan and say, well, that kind of makes sense for Van Halen as well. And I'll take either one. Like you really can't, to me at this point, you can't give me the complete picture of Van Halen with just one of the lead singers.
That's a good point. I actually like your analogy there. I would actually continue that analogy. I would say that Van Halen with David was the hard partying. We're gonna rock your face off, and we're all gonna get really hammered together until we throw up. Whereas Sammy kind of felt a little more. I don't want to say this to be insulting, but more the Jimmy Buffett Van Halen. Like we're just gonna lay back and cave. We'll get some Jack tequila, and we'll have fun and sway and everything else. But they can still kick your ass when they wanted to. If somebody else crossed you, they'd kick your ass still. But they didn't want it. They just kind of wanted to have a good old time together.
It was like me last night because I got off stage at the Comedy Store for my last set Saturday night, and great shows. But I also had a 6 a.m. tea time this morning, so I was like, all right, I can come home and I can have a couple beers, then I got to go to bed. So Sammy Hagar was like Dave era Van Halen, but there was a bedtime that we had to hit the sheets by.
Right, absolutely. I'd say we're all getting a little older, and it's okay to admit it. Absolutely. Yeah. So then, actually, okay, so this David lasted for about 10 years. Sammy also lasted about 10 years, of course, before the strife happened again, some more tensions going on. And you never know exactly. It's always he said, she said. And that's always the way it's going to be. And we're not owed anything. We don't need to know exactly how it went down. We just know that it did go down. And Sammy leaves the band after the Twister soundtrack, Humans Being, which one of my favorite Van Hagar songs. Great rockin' tune. And the instrumental he did, I think Respect the Wind, I believe it was. Yeah, Respect the Wind was the other one. And then he left, and then it was kind of like the band was up in the air again. What do we do? And of course, this is when the infamous moment happened. And I always call this the infamous moment that killed any chance that Gary had in becoming a Van Halen lead singer. The reunion on MTV Awards between David Lee Roth and the brothers and Mikey. I get up there. It felt like a wrestling event, like the tag teams champions had gotten back together again. It was looking wonderful. Everybody's like, oh, wow, this is this. Let's see what they can do. They put out the best of. They have 2 new tracks on it. Me Wise Magic, I loved. I thought that was a fun bit of rocking. Can't get that stuff no more, which is fine. It's good and great. Me Wise Magic was my choice, though, over the 2 of them. And then it happened again. And all of a sudden, you weren't getting David Lee Roth going down. And I think everybody at that point, a lot of the fans at that point were like, well, fuck. What were you like? Did you have any? You weren't quite in there yet? You said, right? It was right around that time. Did you have any feelings on that situation?
I remember being very frustrated with the band that Sammy Hagar had left. I remember being very, very upset by it. And I remember where I was. I was out front of my house in Williamsburg, Virginia. my parents' house. I was just lucky enough to live there. And I was playing basketball, and I had the boombox, my JVC with hyper bass boombox set up.
Nice.
And because remember, you could like take the speakers off and then put them this
Yep.
far away so that it looks so much cooler, because this sounds so much better than this.
Right. You could angle them a little bit too.
Black.
You could like surround sound kind of thing in a way. Like it mattered when it's that small of a boombox, but it worked.
It wasn't quite the tech setup we had today, kids. And I was shooting hoops, and it feels like it was the summertime, but maybe that's just because I was, I was sweaty, which I am anyway. I remember hearing on the radio, I think it was probably FM 98.7 in Williamsburg, Virginia, that Sammy Hagar and Van Halen were parting ways. And I remember thinking, God damn it, guys, can you please hang on to a lead singer that I like, because if we can't work it with Dave, we can't work it with Sammy. And then I don't remember watching the MTV Video Awards or Movie Awards, whatever it was, live. I don't remember watching that, but it's there somewhere. Trivia question: can you name the host of that show?
No, I can't. I can't.
It was Dennis Miller. Was hosting it. Because he just says like, ladies and gentlemen, Van Halen, and it's them, and they come out, and it lasted all but a night, because backstage tempers were already flaring. And that right there, I think it's a great lesson for people in any walk of life, because the way that Van Halen got together with Sammy, it was a little serendipitous, because Eddie and Sammy had the same car guru that they went to, and Claudio was the guy's name, and he kind of hooked them up. But initially, they all got together in like a Warner Brothers boardroom or something like that, and they were talking about the contract. And the band kind of is looking at each other, and they're like, this isn't the right vibe to start a new rock band like this. And so they're like, we're just going to remove ourselves from the situation, and let's just get together and jam and see if this works on any level. And I cannot imagine that they had done that with Roth, even though they already had the 2 new tracks. The tracks feels like everybody's in the studio, and that's great if they were, but it doesn't feel like the magic had ever it wasn't like they enjoyed playing again with Roth. It just it felt very manufactured. Whereas I think when they got together with Sammy, they made a point of saying, let's make sure that we feel this from an organic level, from a music standpoint, before we let all the bean counters get involved. Because you can blame Eddie, or you can blame the singers. Both parties, I think, share some blame, but you have to lay some blame at the failed managerial aspirations, both with Roth and with Hagar and their guys, because they really pitted people against other band members in a way that folks get upset about seeing a big studio movie and saying, oh, well, the studio got their hands on it and they started mucking with it. I think the same thing could be said for the managers in Van Halen. Van Halen is 10 out of 10 when it comes to the music. They were never the best at picking the right managers for their ship to be steered.
Absolutely. I mean, I remember reading all these interviews. Eddie wasn't a big fan of the politics or any of the business side of things. He just wanted to lock himself in 5150 and play some licks and with his brother. And then whoever else comes along, absolutely strap on a guitar, strap on some mics, and let's just go. That's the way he felt. He didn't care about this other stuff. I think every good band, if they're going to be overall successful long-term with each other, they got to have that one person who can kind of handle the business side of things at least. And that's what lets them keep that separate. So they can do the music, let them do the other side of things, and that's what ends up keeping bands together. I think sometimes a family is much better off to deal with things like that, because it's like even your own family, you don't want to talk politics at the table. You don't talk anything like that at the table. You want to just focus on the music. And I think a good bandman who has the acumen to deal with a record company, that lets the band side of things do it. And Van Halen could have used that, I think, and they never really did have anybody like that. David was kind of that way a little bit, I think, but he had too much of I shouldn't say this, but I feel like he had too much of an ego, a little bit too much of a prima donna to kind of really look out for the band, a little bit more himself at times. It kind of felt like, I could be wrong. That's just
I think that his ego was necessary in getting the band to where they became 100%. Initially. But then that also is the thing where it's like, then you have more people. There's more people backstage. There's more people whispering in your ear, hey, you can do this. You can make a movie. You can make a solo album. You can write a book. You can do all these things, which is great. Go off and do that stuff. But you can't ever forget where you came from.
Right.
And I feel like with the band, it became this thing where you have this genius who just wants to be a genius and lock himself in a literal closet and play guitar. And if you're going to do that, you need to have somebody that you can trust that is going to be taking care of the day-to-day operations. And I just don't think that they ever they've had that in spurts, but once those people leave, then it becomes chaos overnight. Like there was a time in the mid 90s when Van Halen literally didn't have a manager. So you would try to get in touch with them and you're talking to Alex and it's like, you sure you don't have representation? Like somebody wants to book me at a club, fine, call me, but you should still talk to my rep. And I'm like this is Van Halen we're talking about.
Right. I can't even imagine that, but that's how it was for them. Absolutely. I think it's funny actually talk about David leaving and David get those whispers in his ear because I think that's exactly what happened. I think he's like, you know what, I'm tired of fighting with Eddie as far as things. I want to like manage my own career. I want to do my own things without having to worry about Eddie butting heads with Eddie. And so David went off on his own and he kind of did this whole, California Girls and wish they could just Gigolo. It's kind of like I remember when I was young, I was kind of like, what are you doing? What are you doing, David? I kind of feel like a weird ship to take. And it actually caused me to almost disrespect his solo career for quite a long time because actually I went back and some of that stuff is really good. He had some great guitar work himself and it's good stuff. But I feel the way he presented himself was this like lounge lizard kind of thing and it made him look a little false compared to the rock and roll band that Van Halen was. Did you ever have any issues with his solo stuff? Did you like it? Did you go with it?
I never felt that strongly about it one way or the other until later when I listened to a lot of those tunes and was like, this is actually like really good stuff. Like you have Billy Sheehan, who was a bassist that Eddie was infatuated with for a long time. Yeah. You obviously have one of the all-time masters in Steve Vai on the axe. Then you got Bissonette on the drums. And with Diamond Dave, I actually met Billy Sheehan at the Improv one time after a show. And he was in the crowd. So him and I were talking and he was very nice, very complimentary. And I got to have a beer and just talk to this dude. And he was telling me that, when they recorded that first album with Diamond Dave, they would get together at Dave's place in Pasadena. And in his garage, he had this fridge full of Miller Lite cans that were like 3 years old. And those what is up with all these beer cans that are 3 years old? And he's like, oh, that's from the US Festival. He had beer left over from the US Festival in his fridge. And so they were just drinking this 3-year-old skunky beer while they were, writing and going crazy and stuff like that. And it's like,
wow.
Yeah. And, but I listened to those tracks and I'm like, dude, David Lee Roth would have been just fine as a famous celebrity singer if he never came across Van Halen. I believe that he still would have blown up and become something. He may have become more of like a Billy Squier, somebody you know for a handful of hits versus like an all-time legend status like Van Halen. But he was just such a one-of-a-kind entertainer. And again, that's what made the dichotomy of Van Halen combustible, but it also made them great because you had varying musical influences all coming together from literally all over the world. You have Indonesia, you have the Netherlands, you have the Midwest, you have this New York hippie scene all coming together in Southern California to make this sound that is just inimitable. And without Dave being part of that magic, it doesn't work the same.
Absolutely. And I think David also definitely was someone who wanted to bring in those outside influences, like you say. I know that Eddie, for example, and Alex, for sure, they didn't really seem to want to venture outside of Mother, outside the brand too often, as it were. Except for the one time. So my side addendum that you knew I'm going to talk about was the time that Brian May and Eddie Van Halen did get together for the Starfleet project.
Yeah,
and what a great idea. This is something that just, I don't think would happen today. Maybe it would, but I feel like this is like an old 80s story where Brian May decides he was off from Queen. He was off from the tour at this point. He's like, you know what? I'm just going to call up some friends. I'm going to get together. I'm going to make an adaptation of a Japanese cartoon that my kid loves. Then do another song that's just an old Queen outtake that never recorded, and then we'll just jam it, and we'll just put up this whole project like that. So 3-track EP, and you got Brian May and Eddie Van Halen trading licks, and like those are two of the greatest guitarists of all time, also speaking, and they work together so well from every story that I've heard. Eddie loved being there for the first time, like outside of Van Halen, and Brian, of course, has had a grand old time. They had some people as well. They had Alan Bratzer on the drums, Phil Chen on bass, Fred Mandel on keyboards. I think Roger Terrell actually added some drums and backing vocals after the fact. But what a weekend that would have been if I could have been a fly in the wall of that studio, right?
Yeah, it's almost like Brian is like, all right, look, if I'm going to do Freddie's Flash Gordon, whatever, then I'm going to get to do my own stuff next time we get a break. And
Right.
yeah, to be a fly on the wall for those sessions, to be a fly on the wall when Michael Jackson is recording "Beat It" and Eddie comes in and just is too shy to even ask for money. He just shows up, plugs in, and he just like kind of like that, and they're like, I think we got it. Like it's just so cool.
Some of those are the best stories to get outside the band. You get to see them spread their wings in different kind of ways. Of course, you saw them of course, Back to the Future. You get the Eddie Van Halen solo in Back to the Future for Marty McFly melting somebody's ears. Just records that for the hell of it, and like, yeah, sure, let's use it. That's Eddie to a T. You want something, you got it.
Yeah, there was so much like debate about whether that was actually Eddie Van Halen on guitar, and I think that they arrived on it actually is Eddie. It may have been an outtake from the Wildlife soundtrack that he was doing. I can't remember exactly what it was, but it's like, is that Eddie? Is that not Eddie? Because it's not a Van Halen song, but
Right.
it does say Edward Van Halen, so it's almost like they weren't allowed to use the actual name Van Halen at that time. I don't know if that's true, but it is. Back to the Future is one of my favorite movies. Not just for that Van Halen reference, but also the even more overt Van Halen reference when Marty McFly is actually playing guitar, and you can tell who he wants to be on stage. I mean, there ain't no doubt about it.
Oh no, he's definitely playing. If he had a Frankencaster, he would have played it for sure. I love it. All right, so we got into the Sammy era. Now, the Sammy era was strong, we said, and then of course we just mentioned, okay, so David Lee Roth comes back for the songs and he's out of the outs again. And they went through this kind of, you mentioned it before, they didn't know what they were doing. They were calling Alex. They were kind of auditioning singers left and right. Mitch Malloy got a couple of tracks recorded. There's talk about maybe Patti Smythe. I don't even know what's going on in Eddie's mind at this point. What an interesting combination that could have been. I even heard at one point Billy Squier himself, he mentioned earlier, was a potential possibility at one point, throwing it out there. I wouldn't have hated it. Billy's, I think, is very underrated at times. And I guess then Ray Daniels steps in, and who had some ties with Extreme, and said, "Hey, Extreme's kind of on the outs a little bit. Nuno had left. The band hadn't officially announced their breakup. I think Nuno kind of wanted to do his own thing, but Gary, I guess, was like, I don't want to announce anything because who knows? Maybe he'll come back." Kind of thing. One of those jilted lovers kind of thing. Like, oh, let's not tell the family yet. We're not sure. But then Ray then tells Gary, he's like, do you want to go audition? And Gary's like, well, audition for Van. I mean, hell, I'll go out there, I'll sing a few Van Halen songs, and hey, I'll get a weekend, I'll get a story out of it. I can go back, tell the buddies, tell the boys I got to sing with Eddie Van Halen. Sure, why not? Goes out there, they meet on the plane. He's out there for 45 minutes, and they've already written the first song together. And Gary's like, I guess Eddie's first thing was, "Hey, nice to meet you. Want to sing?" He's like, can I take a piss first? I just got off the plane. But I really feel I don't want to talk to you about this being my introduction to the era, really, when I really went into it. Gary felt damned right from the get-go. I mean, it's hard enough for a band to replace a successful, legendary lead singer like David Lee Roth, and to do it successfully, with somebody like Sammy Hagar, who obviously already had his pedigree. He had Montrose, he had some solo albums that were pretty successful overall. But Gary only had Extreme, and they had the one or two hits, and they were known, but it was more known for Nuno's flair than for anything else. But Gary kind of seemed like damn to fail. How do you follow that up? The fan base is already split between Sammy and Dave. It almost felt like the only thing they could agree on was, well, not Gary. Sammy or Dave, but not Gary. But at the same time, there was a burst of creativeness out of Eddie. Eddie said he felt free, and you can kind of tell from 3 that Van Halen 3 was an Eddie album for sure. And the more that comes out about that, the more it sounds accurate. I mean, I hear nowadays that Alex didn't actually even play drums on it because Alex was going through some kind of personal issues or perhaps a divorce or something to that effect. So Eddie played a lot of the drums. Michael only played bass on a couple of tracks. You could hear Eddie's voice in the background a lot more. It almost felt like an Eddie Van Halen solo project. But to Eddie, it was just business as usual. It's just what he does. I'm going to play the music. If Alex can't be here, I'll just throw the drums on there. It's still Van Halen kind of thing.
Yeah, there's got to be so many tapes that exist of just Eddie doing all that kind of stuff anyway particularly throughout the Sammy era, because they had already built the 5150 studio and they recorded 1984 in there. And so from there on, you have so many basement tapes of probably just Eddie doing a lot of the instrumentation and some of the singing as well. I mean, I think that the biggest issue with Van Halen 3 is that you're bringing in a lead singer who is known in music circles, but isn't a superstar by any, and again, I say this all due respect to Gary Cherone, probably at that point, not even as big of a name as somebody like Billy Squier, who led his own band. And now you have Eddie being experimental in a time that was so turbulent for rock music. Going into the late 90s, you're coming out of the grunge era, you're getting into this, Matchbox 20, Blink 182, Weezer, Radiohead. There's all these newer kind of different sounding bands coming alive. And whereas something like Humans Being, which is by far the grungiest of the Van Halen songs coming out of the grunge era, you can get away with that because you have an established lead singer and you're already this band that's kind of coasting at 30,000 feet,
Right.
If you have a new lead singer and there's all this new, not to mention the fact that this is your third lead singer, and people, whether they agreed with the Van Halens or the lead singers, you get tired of hearing about the controversy. And sometimes the controversy for the moment, not in the grand scope of things when you look back, but in the moment, you're tired of hearing about Van Halen because you're not hearing about new music. You're just hearing about this lead singer's out. Now this one's back in. Oh, no. Now that one's out again. And now we're going to bring this one in, this new one. It just became too much of a story, I think,
right,
where you couldn't separate the story and the rumor mill and the infighting from the music. And when the music doesn't sound instantly like Panama or Best of Both Worlds, you're like, oh, well, then this isn't as good. And it's also this new lead singer. So there was just so much going against that album that not even Fire in the Hole appearing in Lethal Weapon 4 can rescue.
I love that moment. I was out there standing up when that happened. I agree with you. And I think part of it, too, you mentioned it specifically that Gary didn't have quite the name. He had success, and he was a great singer, no doubt. But I don't think Gary had what David and Sammy had, which was the ability to kind of stand up to Eddie. I don't mean necessarily in a bad way. I think Gary would kind of he was put in a position where I'm singing for one of my heroes. Oh, yeah, sure. You're the genius, Eddie. You do it. I'll do whatever you want me to do. Whatever you say, it's your band. Didn't feel like his band. It felt like their band, and he's just a hired lead gun in a way. And I think like at points it felt like Eddie told Gary or shaped Gary to try to sing like Sammy. I kind of feel like that was part of it, because if you hear Gary's vocals on that album, they don't sound like Gary from Extreme. Mostly, they sound somewhat like it, but they actually do sound reminiscent of Sammy, even more than just him singing over Eddie Van Halen. It just kind of had that kind of same kind of feel to it. I think that was part of it. And Gary has always been a very experimental person. Anyway, Extreme got very experimental. That was their Queen side. They used to do all sorts of different genres. So he's probably like, sure, go ahead. That's what we do. Throw everything at the kitchen sink. Whereas Van Halen, we have talked about David and Sammy, they're big party rock bands. They're not the big philosophical kind of bands. And that's what Gary wrote. Gary wrote more philosophical type lyrics. And it's not saying that Gary's any smarter than these guys, but he definitely liked more of an introspective kind of look at himself. Whereas Sammy and David were very extroverted and out there. And I think that kind of also harmed it as well. My favorite quote from Gary, not quote, but a very story about what Gary talks about this time, is that Gary has always said he wishes that instead of going right in and making an album, that they got to tour together first. Tour together, gel together, really get to know each other and feel each other out on stage and in their musicianship. And then they could have gone and made an album that kind of would have felt more creatively together, rather than being kind of like an Eddie solo album that they kind of worked on together.
I think the biggest issue with it not working as well as they had wanted it to, or the way that we thought it could have, is simply that the band had already been an established, great, kick-ass rock and roll band for 20 years. So look at the bands that have stayed together for 20 years. We talked about Aerosmith at the top of the show, Rolling Stones. Those bands and all of their greatness, occasionally after that 20-25 year point, they could still have a hit or two come out. Aerosmith had that incredible resurgence in the early 90s, but after that, it was like, okay, Don't Want to Miss a Thing was, part of Armageddon. They had like a blues album. They had Just Push Play. They had a couple, Jaded, stuff like that. But you're a band, and you, at least Mick and Steve, were there when they were making all of the huge hits. So when you tour, the folks, those are the songs that they want to hear. The problem with Gary is that he's joining a band that has a 20-year track record of incredible hits that people would die to hear live. So when they tour, regardless whether it's touring after or before an album, those are the songs that you want to hear the most, just because they're at that point in their rock legacy where, it's that old joke. It's like, we want to hear the hits. We don't want to hear the new song.
Right.
And by the time a rock band is 20 years old, they don't want to hear the new stuff.
Right.
They just don't. you can get lucky and you can catch fire. You can catch lightning in a bottle. You know, AC/DC had Black Ice come out in 2010, and it's like, holy crap, there's like 3 or 4 tracks that now I want to hear live if I get the chance to see AC/DC.
Right.
But there's very few songs that you can say like that a band cranked out after that 20, 25 year point that you're like, oh yeah, put that in the all-time hits section.
100%. I agree with you on that. And I think that's exactly what I mean about that is if Gary had toured first, there wouldn't have been any new songs to throw when it would have been Gary singing all the classics. Got the band. I think the fans could have warmed up to him a little bit more there. And I think fans generally, if you look back, fans were appreciative of that tour. They said that Gary did a pretty good job overall of covering David, covering Sammy, and doing well.
Oh yeah.
And then you kind of get that behind you to go into make, and then you get to have that album. At this point, you have at least a stepping stone to be able to maybe do something new and different. But at the same time, you're exactly right. It would never have been the same level as something like a Right Now or a Jump or a Panama at this point. You're stuck with that. And I think Gary knew that too, which is why I think that was definitely a little bit of a mutual decision. I mean, you've heard back and forth after the album, the tour, they actually started recording again. I guess there's a lot of stuff in the vaults, Michael was saying, potentially of some other songs. I know some of them kind of went out. Gary did a couple of them for Tribe of Judah, which was his next like solo band thing that he did. But at that point, it was a time like, who wants this to continue? I think Eddie loved the fact that Gary was like there, and Gary obviously has the least ego of the 3 lead singers. He's going, yeah, sure, I'll have a good time. I'll have fun here. But I think the management pushed him on it because the album was only a gold level album instead of like platinum like every other album had been. And the discourse being around, I think they kind of put some pressure on Eddie. And I think Gary kind of saw the writing on the wall too. He's like, you know what? I'm going to make this easy on you. I think we should maybe we should part ways. And I was upset about it when it happened. I remember because Gary was my boy and I felt really bad, but I understood it.
I remember thinking if you're not going to you're going to try a new guy and that's fine, you know, right. And it's a little like a sports franchise that is just used to winning all the time. Like you look at the Patriots and they won 7 Super Bowls. And then if they squeak into the playoffs this year, say at 9-8, it's not going to be enough for that fan base because we're used to hoisting a trophy. So right. Even just slipping into the playoffs and being a wild card isn't good enough, you know?
Right. I did that.
And so I remember thinking, okay, you experimented with Gary. It didn't work. At this point, this is now becoming my favorite band. This is my favorite band of all time based on what they had done. The right. only route to go is either get back with Sammy or get back with Dave. That's it. Those are the only plays on the table if you want to truly remain Van Halen as far as the band and the touring and the sound and possibly making new music again that folks are going to resonate with.
Absolutely. And that's what they did. They went back with Sammy, and I saw that tour, and the tour was a little bit of a mess. Obviously, Eddie went back into some substance abuse issues. He had some alcoholic stuff going on. And the issues with Sammy didn't really gel with that. And you can kind of tell they weren't having as much fun as they had before. It felt like they were kind of putting that frosting over the top of it to try to like kind of fake it till you make it. They obviously could. There's times actually had altercations on stage at one point and everything else. And Sammy just had enough. And I understand that too, because Sammy was successful enough. His solo albums and solo tours weren't nearly Van Halen level, but they were definitely sustainable. And you got to have fun time. And in fact, that was one of the most interesting tours we've ever seen in the Van Halen camp was that 2002 Sans Halen tour when Dave and Sammy actually went on tour together. I wish I had seen that. I didn't get a chance to, unfortunately. Actually, I really wish I'd seen the Boston one because Gary actually got to sing with Sammy and Gary Extreme actually sang backing vocals for him. That would have been fun for me, of course. But what an idea that was. Did you get to see that tour when it was out?
No, I have a dear friend from college, and we were talking about going to see it that summer, and we didn't. But I'm happy to report that we're not going to miss that chance again because after I do this weekend in Little Rock, Arkansas, I'm flying from there to Denver to go see the Best of All Worlds tour at Red Rocks. So, I mean, I'm seeing the Red Rocker front of basically a Van Halen tribute at Red Rocks. It's like, what more do you want? So I'm just super excited about that. I didn't see that tour, but I've heard, the fun thing about that tour is that you're gonna call your friends. If you're Sam, you're gonna call your friends. And so you had all these different people coming on stage and hopping on and playing a couple songs. And the legends of that tour of Sammy every night knocking on Dave's dressing room door. Hey man, you want to come do the encore with us? The fans would love it. And Dave, for as funny as he was, I mean, he had that, there's Sammy banging on the door, bottle of tequila in one hand and his dick in the other. it's very funny, but it's also like, man, what if you just could have loosened the grip a little bit, if you could have 38 special, hold on loosely a little bit to your ego and who you think that Diamond Davis is supposed to be, man, what a memorable treat that would have been for the fans.
Absolutely.
You know?
I think that is definitely a missed opportunity. And that's Dave, though. That's Dave in a nutshell. He's very controlling about his image. He's very controlling about what he wants to do. And you know what? It got him very far in life, so I understand it. But again, I do think it's a terrible missed opportunity. Hell, if he jumped up on that Gary night, it could have had all three singers singing from Van Halen in one moment. And what a instant that would have been, for sure. So yeah, okay. So Sammy ends, of course, and that's when we come back. David finally gets. I guess actually, there's a story I just read about that I didn't know about. Maybe you knew about that. After Gary, before Sammy, they actually flirted with David Lee Roth again, and actually had recorded some stuff together. I did not know that until recently. I don't know why I didn't know that. But again, it just didn't work out. It didn't work out. It kept not working out until finally, after Sammy leaves, finally after 2005 or so, 2006 comes along, and finally we get David back with the band. Unfortunately, this is where Mikey left. So we kind of got robbed of that foursome, that big return of all four members. Not a slight on Wolfgang at all. I love Wolfgang Van Halen. I think he's done some of the best work. He's done such a great job stepping out of his father's shadow and creating his old musical identity for himself. You know, I told you I saw him opening up for Metallica in East Rutherford. He's a wonderful musician in his own right. So I know slight against them, but it kind of felt like a little bit cheated. Like we're finally getting them back together, and then we lose Mikey.
I think on the surface, I would agree with that, just because you want to see the original four back. But I think that there's no way that we even get that reunion at all without Wolfgang. I think people really shortchange Wolfgang's influence as far as keeping his dad sober and keeping his dad, frankly, alive for the last 15 years and being that source of light in very dark times for Eddie. You cannot understate that. The fact that Eddie got to look at his kid playing on stage with him and that inspiring him to stay on the straight and narrow, to stay sober and continue this tour and suck it up and go with whatever, stage rap Dave's going to do. And it just doesn't happen if that's Mike. As much as I love Mike, and it's no slight to Mike, it's just that you're not Eddie Van Halen's son,
Right.
That's the only way that we get any of those tours. It's the only way that we get new music from Van Halen, which A Different Kind of Truth, the album, is, I think, incredible when you listen to it. The fact that they could pull that off. Dave lyrically is as good as he's been. If his singing voice wasn't, lyrically, he's as interesting and as hilarious as he ever was.
Yeah.
The musicianship is Van Halen, and it's on a par with anything they've ever done from a music technicality standpoint. And we don't get any of that unless Wolfgang is game. And so I give him a huge tip of the cap for signing on for something like that, where they knew he was going to get criticized from people before they even heard him play a note or sing a lick. It was like, this is just not Mike. So what are we doing here? But I remember actually knowing that press conference was happening when they were going to announce the tour, and it was at the Four Seasons in Beverly Hills. And at that time, I was Beverly Hills adjacent. I was on the wrong side. And my buddy Steve Simone and I were like, do we go to the Four Seasons? Do you think they're there right now? And just seeing that announcement and seeing that they were back and seeing Eddie and Dave look like they made nice and meant it to a certain extent was just so exciting. And from there, I remember it was like you're on a roller coaster with no harness. And it's like, let's just hang on until this tour comes to LA. I don't need the tour to hit every day they announce. I just need y'all to hang on until I can see you, because I had never seen Van Halen live to that point.
Oh, wow. That's a great story. And you know what? I got to give you credit where credit's due. I'm glad you actually brought that up, because I come from the Mikey side. You're coming from the Wolfgang side. That's a very true statement. We know that Wolfgang was so important to his father, and his father's always been about family. Him and Alex created the band together, really. He had his father guest on Diver Down. Great stuff there. And so Wolfgang coming across, it just felt like more of the family business. And I mean, eventually I was okay with it as well. It just felt like a little missed opportunity. But at the same time, I don't know if we get Wolfgang without that experience, that he got in Van Halen, to be able to step out and do what he's done with a couple albums already and more potentially. And it's amazing. Speaking of Wolfgang, after Eddie tragically passed, of course, you got to see it live in person. Taylor Hawkins, when he passed away, the drummer from Foo Fighters passed away. He got these 2 wonderful tribute concerts, one in London, one in LA. And unfortunately, Eddie never got one. We'll talk about that in a second. But Wolfgang actually got up on stage in that. And man, if anybody ever sounded like Eddie, it was Wolfgang. He kind of pulled off those licks. I was like, I almost saw Eddie up there. I felt like just for a few minutes, a little bigger, but not quite that the wasted away Eddie he was. But man, he could hit those notes and hit that sound was just so chef's kiss.
Dude, it was unbelievable. It was like watching a Star Wars movie where you know that this one has the Force too.
Right.
You know, because I was there with my 3 dear friends, the World Girls, Roxy, Dorina, and Steph. We all went to the Foo Fighters tribute together. We're in the back of the Forum, which is like all the way up, nosebleeds, looking down on behind the stage. But you still have this huge monitor right here where you can see everything that's happening in front of the stage. It was actually like a great view. And Kroll starts doing this talk about how, you know, a lot of times when you saw Taylor, you would notice he was wearing these certain shorts, and these shorts had a certain stripy pattern on it. And as soon as he says stripy pattern, the place starts going crazy because they know what he's referencing. And he's like, you know, and then he just says the name Van Halen. I still get goosebumps thinking about it. And the place just erupts. And he's like, well, we happen to have a Van Halen in the building. And he brings up Wolfgang. And they launch into, I think they did Hot for Teacher first.
Yeah.
And then I thought they were going to go to On Fire after that because they did Hot for Teacher into On Fire at the UK tribute.
Right.
And I'd seen it on YouTube and I'm like, holy crap, this is amazing. On Fire is such a deep cut, but it's such a great tune off the first record. Yeah. And instead they launch into Panama.
Right.
And I think Steph was filming me watch this happen. And I'm air guitaring. It's the opening of Panama and I'm doing the Eddie face. And it's just like, I could not believe how powerful that moment was. It was just unreal to get to witness it. And I'm never going to be a guy that goes to see Wolfgang. I saw him open for Guns N' Roses, and he was great. Oh. I'm never going to be that guy that goes to a Wolfgang show that's like, oh, man, I kind of hope you play Jump. You know, I want you to do you, but I think for that moment, if he happens to hop on stage with the Best of All Worlds tour in LA, then I'll be over the moon about it. Play some Mammoth, play some VH, play whatever you want. I'm never going to expect him to cover Van Halen, but to see it that night was pretty special.
If he wants to, great. He's made it pretty clear that he doesn't want to do that, generally speaking.
I don't think he should. To be really honest with you, I don't think he should as a regular occasion. You know,
absolutely. But he picks his spots, and this was one of those perfect spots. I'm really jealous that you got to see that. I wanted to see that tribute, of course, myself. Probably my favorite tribute concert since the Freddie Mercury one. And of course, you got to see my boy Brian Roger play as well.
Everybody was there, dude. If they were ever in a rock band at any point, they were on stage that night. And you know, it was Def Leppard, it was Motley Crue, it was Queen, it was the Foo Fighters, it was Van Halen, it was Miley Cyrus. It was unreal. Joan Jett. Joe Walsh was there. Like, everybody was there. And you missed it, PLD.
I know. Oh, so sad. So sad. I did watch it streaming the entire time, and I recorded it and put it on like an old school mixtape almost in a way. I put it on.
Hey, you know what? I had a better time that night until we were all trying to find our Uber at the Forum afterwards. Then you made the right decision, sir.
Fair enough. So that's what we are. Now that also does lead to the point where we never really got an Eddie tribute concert or way. It feels like we should have. There's only certain acts that feel like they deserve a real full-on concert. I mean, like, you get certain small gigs, certain small things. But Eddie felt like it would have been a great time to get everybody together one last time, get all those great guitarists who basically Eddie's children. Get the Satriani, get the Nunos, get the Vise, get all those people up there one time. And unfortunately, it didn't happen. And if you listen to Wolfgang, it was most likely due to David again. That's what we've heard. Again, don't know behind the scenes necessarily. I'm sure there's a he said kind of thing going on. But I do feel like it's a missed opportunity. What are your thoughts? Who would you like to have seen on a tribute concert like that for Eddie?
You know what's hilarious is like probably 4 of my first 5, like if we're doing a fantasy draft, my 4 top picks would probably be the Best of All Worlds tour, where let's get Jason Bonham on drums. If you can't have Alex, obviously.
Right.
And then, you know, I can't think of a better guy than Satriani. Vi is way up there. As far as guys that love and appreciate Eddie and can sound like Eddie, because everybody was influenced by him, you know. Absolutely. But I mean, obviously you want to see somebody like Slash. You want to see somebody like, I would say Richie Sambora is underrated. As far as a guy who can just play that talking guitar style. Neil Sean, I'd love to see. Vi, Eric Johnson, like just like all these guys that like. I'm just trying to think of guys who Tom Morello is another one who doesn't necessarily sound like Eddie, but was heavily influenced by Eddie. Mike McCready from Pearl Jam.
Right.
There's, but I really feel like we are getting that. You've seen it live. I haven't seen it yet, but I feel like we're getting that Eddie tribute that we've been craving since 2020 with this tour, hopefully this summer.
It really, really is. I mean, it's a great set list. Obviously, heavy on the Van Halen. Sure, there's some semi-solo songs as well because it is the best of all worlds. But it is the closest thing we would get. I actually, funnily enough, I was in my back pocket that night because it seems that Mammoth Van Halen had played in Albany like the night before. So I kind of have a head, maybe this is the time where he gets up on stage. But he must have had a tour date the next day because he didn't get up on stage. I was back in my mind though. Me and my friend Jeremy Noble, we were sitting there going, "Is this the time? Is this time? Is Mammoth coming up now? Is Wolfgang coming?" No, it didn't happen, unfortunately. But it is what it is. All right, so let's see now. Where do you think, before we get into our kind of last couple of segments here we have for the show, where do you think Van Halen stands now in terms of just their status in rock and roll, in music, rock and roll first, and in music, which is kind of a different conversation. What do you think about that now?
I think that their status is cemented amongst somewhere in the conversation for the greatest rock bands of all time, simply because at this point, it's simply because of how great and influential and unbelievable and unprecedented Eddie Van Halen is. I think that's where that starts. And then you also have the magic hurdle that very few bands were ever able to overcome, which is replacing lead singers and having, around the same amount of success. Right. In some metrics, even more success after replacing the lead singer. I mean, it's pretty much AC/DC and Van Halen are the ones on the list. And so while Van Halen wasn't as consistent as the Stones or Aerosmith as far as here's an album, here's a tour with the same guys that you know and love. I think that the longevity, and I think that just the way that the music holds up sonically, I think that they're on a very short list. I think that Zeppelin is in the conversation, Aerosmith, obviously, the Stones, Van Halen, and Metallica, more metal, but still deserves the flowers, AC/DC. Absolutely. And it's a pretty, Queen might sneak in there, I think, as well. And it's like, it's a very short list. Like there's so many bands, like the Who, for example, you can't tell the story of rock and roll without the Who. But when I hear a Who record, it doesn't hold up the same way that a Van Halen record holds up to me.
And that's what personal love is, and that's okay. That's all right. You said it. I agree 100% about the lead singer thing. Of course, I don't think there is anybody else. AC/DC, I don't think so. Besides AC/DC and Van Halen. And you mentioned consistency. Actually, it's kind of funny you said before how Van Halen was traversing that time in the 90s when Gary came in. Bon Jovi was a great example of sticking to their guns and they're able to stay at that 30,000 because they kind of
and to survive grunge. Yeah, I mean, to be like Guns N' Roses and Metallica, Aerosmith, Van Halen, I think, and Bon Jovi eventually got through it, but I would say that those other bands soared through it a little cleaner than even Bon Jovi did until it wasn't, until Axl became, got the lead singer disease, so to speak, and
right.
And Metallica cut their hair, God forbid. And it's like all these weird things that happened in the 90s that like we lost our minds over. But yeah, it's to survive a musical landscape shift multiple times is something that obviously the Stones can brag about and Aerosmith can brag about, but I think Van Halen can too.
Yeah, absolutely, Van Halen. And they, again, like you said, though, they had more of a problem. I mean, my band Queen, actually, obviously, Freddie passing was a huge hurdle. Around the same time when all the other stuff was going on, so they were basically dead in the water for a long time. But I like the fact how Queen handled their legacy. They didn't do anything for a while. They kind of did their own solo stuff. But when they came back together, they made. I love the name choice. I love they said Queen plus Paul Rodgers, Queen plus Adam Lambert. This is not Queen anymore. It's Brian. It's Roger. It's the music you love. But we're gonna give the other guy. He's working with us, and we can be a little family under that different moniker. I think that's how you can survive in a good kind of way. And also, I think Queen did it the right way in terms of they found people who weren't necessarily Freddie. Like I love Journey, but Journey kind of gets the Steve Perry sound alike, and kind of when I think I hear that, I'm kind of like, well, what are you doing there? Are you trying to fool people with it? Is that what you're trying to do? I don't know. I don't know how you feel about that. Paul Rogers sounded nothing like Freddie Mercury, but that's what made it cool. You got to hear Brian May on "Feel Like Making Love." You know, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, because Paul Rogers has such a history.
Right, absolutely.
With songs that even if you didn't know he was in Bad Company, you didn't know he was in Free, they play those songs. If you're just going to see Queen, you're like, oh, this is the All Right Now guy? Holy crap, this is good.
Right, absolutely. So that's what always handle it for me. But Van Halen, going back to our obviously main topic, they did the same type of thing in terms of they always kept despite the turmoil, they always kind of had that legacy. They always felt like we are who we are. We're going to present our music, which you love, and you know you love it. And we'll get through this. We'll get through this together. And they did. And they did. Even their last couple tours, different kind of truth, everything else. They always felt like at the top of their game. We knew what you're going to get with Van Halen, and it was a legendary act of rock and roll. So definitely, I agree with you on that as far as that goes. I think up top tier rock and roll bands of all time. You can't mention guitar without mentioning Eddie Van Halen. And you can't mention rock and roll without mentioning the Van Halen as the band. David Lee Roth, one of the greatest frontmen of all time. Sammy Hagar, great singer of all, one of the great rock bands of all time. Michael Anthony, fun-loving bass guy. Alex holding those beats down. Yeah, it's something special. It's a special unity of those kind of musicians together that create a legacy. Like
Eddie was the ace in the hole that they'll always have against any other band. And the other thing is when they were on, they had more fun than anybody else. You know, I love Aerosmith, I love the Stones, I love Skynyrd, I love Metallica, AC/DC. Nobody had close to as good of a time playing music than Van Halen did when it was working. And that comes through the TV screen when you're watching them. That comes through the speakers when you're listening to them. It sounds more joyful and more exuberant and more fun than any other band. And that's probably why they're my band.
And I get that, and exactly. And I want to point out specifically for me, what I love about that is that's what it was them in the 80s. When you traverse the musical scene went to a more of a grungy, darker, depressing kind of sound and everything else. And so that's why people, I think, turned against Van Halen a little bit. But when it was done, they came out the other side and you're like, you realize, no, we want to have fun with these guys. We love these guys. And that's what let them stay on top when other bands kind of faltered.
It's not Van Halen's fault that all these other bands came after them trying to sound like Eddie. You can't pin that on Eddie. It's like, oh, you're so great. It's like, of course, you can't blame bad high school basketball on Steph Curry because everybody's trying to jack threes from half court. Like that's that guy's style. You can't blame him.
Absolutely. All right, let's get into some nitty gritty before we end up here. I got two things we're gonna do. First off, I want to hear it's Desert Island time. You have to take one Van Halen disc, and it can't be the best of. Can't be the best of album. You have to take one Van Halen album forever and forever. What Van Halen album is it going to be, and why?
I ask myself this question every day, and I usually come up with a different answer. But I think that I've arrived with I'm taking Van Halen 2 to that Desert Island.
Nice.
Because you have enough Van Halen muscle with stuff like Somebody Get Me a Doctor. And and Bottoms Up and DOA and stuff like that. But you also have Dance the Night Away, which is my favorite Van Halen song. And it just makes you feel good. And Beautiful Girls, capping that album, is just, again, if we're going to a desert island here, how are you going to be on an island at a beach setting and not have Beautiful Girls?
Fair. Very fair.
Yeah.
I went through this a bunch too in my head, and as much as I love 3, I wouldn't bring 3 because for various reasons. It's got we already mentioned some of the issues with it. Even though I do love that album. I want to state that quite clear. I actually love the album. I love a lot of the songs on there, and I can listen to it no problem on rotation. I don't skip it. I went between 2 Sammy albums, surprisingly enough, and I think it's because I'm a little older now, so kind of in that older kind of feel good stage. And I think I almost went with Balance. Which is a surprise to some, because I like that Balance had that kind of, it was a great title for an album because it had that kind of hard rocky 7 Seal grunginess. Don't tell me what love can do, but it also had that very fluffy pop, like Can't Stop Loving You, and like Take Me Back, that kind of thing. It had the nice balance in there, but I couldn't turn away from For Unlawful Carnal Knowledge.
Yep.
That's what it was for me. I mean, it had the string of hits. It right now might be one of the most important songs they ever did. It was one of the times they kind of stepped a little bit away from the party, but it was still still about celebrating life in a way. Like right now, this is all stuff's going on, and we got to live our life right now. So it kind of was a little best of both worlds in and of itself. I love we had Run Around, Top of the World. You had that jump riff, the end of the jump, going into Top of the World. Pound Cake, Judgment Day, great song. In and Out, Dream Is Over. I could name it, but 316. 316, an amazing instrumental there from Eddie. And so at the end of the day, I wanted to go with the From Lawful Carnal Knowledge, but you can't go wrong.
It's a good pull. And if I'm visiting your desert island and you told me you brought a Van Halen disc and you brought Van Halen 3, I'm going to say, PLD, come on. I think you'll love it. But there's there's a few guitar licks that, like, as soon as you hear it, it's just like you feel a different temperature in your body, like that Slash opening riff on Welcome to the Jungle. Like, men of a certain age, you just feel something primal awaken inside you. Same thing happens to me when I hear that drill run on Eddie's guitar, kicking off Pound Cake. Just that boom, it just, you wake up. Like, I should have listened to Pound Cake on my way to play golf today, because it was 5:45 in the morning and I had 2 hours sleep, and I'm like, something's got to get me jacked, and that's what I should have done.
Oh, you're so right on that. I mean, I got to tell you, a little spoiler alert. They did that best of all worlds to where Joe Satriani brought out the drill, and I was like, yeah, there it is, baby. There's that sound. I love it.
Oh, I cannot wait. This is one of the few concerts I'm not looking at the set list to see the P break. I'm just gonna go, and I'm just going to wear an adult diaper and just rock out the whole time.
I would not expect anything less from you, my friend. All right, last thing we're going to do. I did this last week with Ken and Maddie. We're going to create the one-offs best of the list. And I had this little bit of different style this week, only 2 of us, of course. But it has a similar style in that we're going to pick we have the top 6 songs are already going to be on the mix. These are the top 3 Dave Spotify stream songs and the top 3 Sammy Spotify stream songs. So we could not pick these. In case we went too deep cut, I wanted to have some greatest hits on there for the fans as well. So we could not pick Jump. We could not pick Panama. We could not pick Running with the Devil. For Sammy, we could not pick Why Can't This Be Love. We could not pick Can't Stop Loving You, which I was surprised was the number 2 streaming Sammy song. And we cannot pick Dreams, which I'm very sad about, because that might be my favorite Sammy era song.
Yeah, it's way up there.
Way up there. So I got these, and we're going to come up with our own best of. We'll trade back and forth, and we're going to go with, each of us get to pick 2 David songs. Okay. Each of us get to pick 2 Sammy songs, and each of us get to pick 1 Gary song. We'll give Gary his laurels and throw him on there. I think that's good enough for 1 album.
So it's Jump, Panama. I'm looking at your email that you sent. It's Jump, Panama, Run with the Devil, and Can't Stop Loving You, Dreams, and what's the other Sammy one?
Why Can't This Be Love?
Why Can't This Be Love? Okay.
Those are the 3 songs that you cannot choose any of those 6 songs. So I'm going to let you, as the guest, start off. And why don't you pick your first David song?
First David song, without question, is Unchained.
Nice. Oh, yes. That is a wonderful tune.
You talk about a way to kick off a concert, and you can YouTube this, kids, whether you want to go to 1984 or you want to go to the 2012 tour that they did. My God, that song, when I remember being at back then it was the Staples Center in 2012, the second tour, touring on the Different Kind of Truth album tour, and Casey and it was Kool and the Gang. Kool and the Gang opened. And it's like, Kool and the Gang was with Van Halen. Kool and the Gang was so goddamn great. They were so good. And I was like 5th row, and you could see the guitar player was playing an Eddie Van Halen like custom guitar. Right. And then celebrate at the end and celebrate good times. Come on, everybody's having such a great time. And then their set ends, and it's like, well, who can follow that? And then the lights go down, and you just hear this goddamn dragon sound of the guitar. And then you see all the band members walk out, and then Eddie just launches into Unchained, and it's like, oh my God, this is I'm in heaven.
All right.
This is what it feels like.
Absolutely. And I know I don't want to always get back to Gary, but that is what they opened the 3 tour with as well. And so I remember going to that tour going, all right, I'm going to get some David stuff and get some Sammy stuff. And I really had just gone through the track list, and I was like, this is one of the songs I hope they played. And I didn't look at the set list at all. And then they opened up with that song. I was like, oh, what a great opening number.
All right. Well, now you got me. Now, damn it, PLD. Now I got to YouTube that tonight. And okay. Officially, Molly cancel my appointments. It's a drinking night for Poppy. Okay, we're gonna be PLD in '98.
Yes. All right. I've done my job. All right. I've done my job. Okay. I'm gonna go with my first David era song, And this is one also, again, I first heard this when I did my Van Halen splurge, heard Van Halen 3 did it, fell in love with it so much more, went back and went, sometimes when I will say, when you kind of binge a catalog, sometimes you kind of maybe miss something and you're kind of like, oh, this is good, but it kind of, some things run together sometimes. This one kind of ran together. And then I heard Gary do it. I went back, went, how did I miss this the first time? That is Mean Street.
Yeah.
Oh, what a roaring riff that is.
And I don't even know what he's doing with his hand. It's like, I don't even know. Is it your fingers? Is it your, what are you doing, Edward?
How are you making this work? Lord, strike that poor boy down. And it just a riff goes up to hell. And I love it so much. It's almost like a darker level of Van Halen song compared to some other pop, like their fun, like more fun jump Panama stuff. But man, the riffs just don't stop with that song. I love it
in
so
1 minute. Eddie shows you how fun and how deep he can go, because that first one where Dave was like, dance, baby, and it's just this cool kind of funky, and then at the end when it's like that deeper, darker solo, it's like, oh wait, we're getting into the bad part of town here. Like we just took a, like, when I hear that end riff of Mean Street, I feel like Thomas and Martha Wayne just left the theater, and I'm like, no, don't take the left. Don't take the left. Not with that pearl necklace on.
Absolutely. Great riff there for sure. All right, what about your second David Lee Roth era song?
This is such a tough call, because I feel like Ain't Talking About Love has everything that you want from Van Halen, from the background vocals to get higher at the very end, because Mikey joins the hey, and that opening riff is just undeniably one of the all-time great. Hear it anywhere, put it up with any song I've ever heard. But if aliens came down from some other planet and they said, what is the essence of Van Halen? The first song I would play for them is Romeo Delight. So I'm going to go Romeo Delight.
Oh, that's a good one.
You know, it's somebody get me a beer, somebody get me to the party, and somebody get me a doctor. That's what that song. It's quintessential Roth Van Halen.
Oh yeah, it's absolutely like looking to fight. That riff. It keeps pounding you. It just keeps pounding you. You kind of starts off one way, kind of gets faster and more tempo and more aggressive as it goes on. I think that might be one of Van Halen's most aggressive songs there is.
And that's why it was such a great show opener for them. And when I saw them the first time I saw them, I'd love to say I remember more of the concert, but I do remember the beginning. And it was Eddie opening with just, obviously he would always open a concert with just like 1 minute of otherworldly noodling. And then he launched into You Really Got Me. Curtain drops. Dave's waving a flag. Van Halen's back. They go from You Really Got Me right into Romeo Delight. And it's like, my God, my ears just got their ass kicked in the most fun way possible.
Oh, love it. I will mention, even though I also was thinking about Ain't Talking About Love, I didn't go there. Unfortunately, we're leaving it off. Both like we love it, but we have to leave it off. There's so many songs to put on here. I remember a great interview with Eddie where he talked about the difference between like what a musician can do with a song, because this is Ain't Talk About Love. He'd play the riff and we'll just play it straight. It was like dun, 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 dun. It was like almost tired, almost like a lullaby. It was like no, 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 no. But you could do that, or you can do and he had the feel into it, and it's like, oh shit, that's what it does. It's such a difference in the sound just by putting a little bit of verve into it. So I do love that. I wanted to pick it, but being a big Queen fan, I love the vocal harmonies, of course. That's a big thing for me. So one of my favorite David Lee Roth era songs, Feel Your Love Tonight. I love the moments where I can't wait to feel your love. And like the vocals go up or higher and higher. And David's having a grand old time and singing that song. It's just kind of a good rock and fun tune for the band. And
that is Hard Rock Beach Boys, that song,
It's what I thought of when you mentioned Hard Rock Beach Boys before. This is exactly what I was thinking. This is Mike Anthony with those backing vocals, crystal clear, fun groove, fun time. I love when they did that live as well. It's such a good concert song. I got to see them do that a couple of times. Wonderful tune. So that is
so many that I'm bummed I can't. I'm so upset that I couldn't get I'm the One in there somewhere. But it's.
Dude, I gotta tell you, I'm trying not to, Mark. But I gotta tell you, that's when I first saw them with Gary and Madison Square Garden. They actually pulled that one off as the encore. I'm the One, and I was like, oh shit, I didn't think they would do that one at all. I was like, oh my God, they're doing I'm the One. Holy shit!
It's so fun. It's like this great hard rock tune, and then you get a little bit of Dave there at the end with the ba ba da shooby wah, and they're just having fun. It's like, who cares? We're having a good time.
Exactly, it's the same thing type of thing, and everybody could throw it in there. You could throw their cover of Ice Cream Man. What a great fun track that is for just so David. I'm sad we didn't get to get Dance the Night Away on there. Your favorite Van Halen tune. I'm sorry, but
yeah, I was going for I was going for more like not introductory Van Halen, but just Unchained is just like, it just gets in your soul. Dance the Night Away is my favorite Van Halen song, but I just figured I'd go a different route, and I wouldn't be such a boring stooge.
That's you're never going to be a boring stooge.
And I also just forgot it for the last 5 minutes.
You could put any song on here and you're not wrong. Let's be honest. Let's be completely honest. I'm just glad, like I said, I was glad they put Dreams on there because that's probably my favorite one, to be honest with you.
I'm not regretting my vice presidential candidates. Okay. That's my ticket. I'm running on Romeo Delight and Unchained.
All right. I think that's a winner. All right, let's go on then to our Sammy era songs. What is your first Sammy era song?
All right. So I can't take God damn, this might even be tougher. As much as I love, I'm not going to say as much as I love one song because I might pick it with my second pick. My first pick is I'll take the Dance the Night Away from the Hagar era, and that's Top of the World to me.
Yeah, absolutely.
Musically very, very different sounding songs, but it's just a celebration of how far we've come, and it's one great night, but that's how you feel. And they still play it whenever a team wins a championship. It's We Are the Champions into Top of the World. That's what you hear.
Great combo. Yeah, I love that one as well. It's actually was definitely on my short list. Mm-hmm. But I'm glad that you picked it, so then I don't have to.
Okay, now scratch my back.
If I could, I would. I don't know if I know, but I'm gonna go with, for my first song, I think it's one of those things where you almost, what are the important songs and what are the ones that you really want to hear versus some of the maybe deeper cuts. I think I got to do a deeper cut, Sammy, not necessarily very deep cut, but I might be influenced by recent YouTube video searches I did. I love me some Summer Nights. I love me some Summer Nights. There's nothing like cracking open a beer outside the park or outside your backyard, a fire burning, and Summer Nights is playing in the background. Summer Night and the radio. It's a perfect radio song there. So I'm gonna go with that one.
It's a Beach Boys tune. That's how it feels. And Eddie messing around with that different style guitar, which I'm a moron musically. I don't understand it, but it just sounded distinct, and it was just a fun thing. And on that tour, you could just see what a good time he was having with the lead singer that he actually could get along with again. And it's like switching instruments and playing keyboards and just jumping around. And he basically looked like Michael J. Fox on stage at the Enchantment Under the Sea dance during that first tour of Sammy. I mean, it's just having the time of his life. And that's why my second Hagar era tune, I would love it. I would love for it to be Pound Cake. I would love for it to be the best of both worlds. But 5150 is one of the songs that wasn't immediately in my Van Halen lexicon when I was listening to that Greatest Hits record many summertimes ago in college. But ever since I heard it, it's gotten its claws deeper and deeper and deeper into me. And then when you watch them play it live on the 5150 tour, it is the most perfect 7 minutes of a band being so in the pocket and so getting along with each other and knowing each other's beats, and just a celebration of every of these different musical backgrounds all coming together to make this one perfect song. And 5150 just gets more and more special as far as Van Halen tunes in my soul and in my heart.
Yeah, that's a good choice. That's a good solid choice. I can't argue with that one for sure. That means I have to come up with my last one. Oh, I got two big ones there. They are both big hits. I'm not going to lie. They're definitely the more basic songs, but I love them both so much. It's a hard one, man. It's a hard one. I'm coming down to it. I think I got to go with the one that was, excluding the other one, but the one that really brought me to Van Halen the first time through, even before Gary, was definitely, it was everywhere in 1991. It was Right Now. That piano, that open piano track. right from the beginning, I had my friends who were big Van Halen fans as well. They would go to we do musical theater together. They'd go in before anybody had rehearsal. They'd find that piano, and sure enough, that piano riff would just start, and everybody would just like, "Yep, there it is, there it is."
Oh, you're awake. I mean, you talk about a sports anthem. Right now is it? It's up there with anything. You know, it's a Crazy Train or a Thunderstruck or Right Now. They're all on the short list. The other one that I would love to have gotten in there is When It's Love, because it's such a great ballad, but then at the end, to hear Van Halen get their Hey Jude moment,
Yes.
I could listen to them nah 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 for 20 minutes.
That was the other one I was arguing myself
Yeah.
with. I almost put that one in there as well. What a great track that is. Lots of fun. Musically, it's just phenomenal. It's a fun love song. It's great. I admit it. I admit it here and now on the air. I am a sucker for a good power ballad anyway. I'm not gonna lie. I'm a softie.
Every bad boy has a soft side.
True. That's true. And I'm sad that When It's Love cannot be on there, but at the same time, I understand when you have so many, just a plethora of good songs. But that was probably one of my favorite concert moments for sure. Just every time I saw them, when they did that song for exactly what you said, it's that sing-along moment. It's the na-na-na-nas all throughout. Every great band has one of those kind of songs. Like, you need one of those kind of songs to really kind of get a crowd together. And it's always a beautiful, fun moments.
Get that lighter out, or it's safer times now, so just get that cell phone light out. That's fine.
Cell phone light, right? God, that nothing ages me more than seeing that. Like at the Taylor Hawkins tribute, when I saw that, everybody had the lights going up. I'm like, God, I'm so old. But okay.
If the artist on stage asks you to turn on your cell phone flashlight, cool, do it. But then just enjoy the show. Like I heard a quote, an interview with Tom Petty, and he was saying like, man, I'm playing these concerts, and I see all these like young kids holding up their phone, and I'm like, if you're not watching me live when I'm right in front of you, what makes you think you're going to go back and watch me on your phone like next week? Like this is your shot, man.
Not in true words have never been spoken, man. Yeah. I don't understand that at all. Some people like to get the clicks or something. Some people like want to share it with people. I get it, for to a degree, but man, put the phone away.
Especially nowadays, because like I remember I saw the last show that Van Halen ever did. I saw them at the Hollywood Bowl. Right. It was a Sunday night. They did 2 shows at the Bowl. Their first time ever performing at the Bowl in 2015. I saw the last show they ever did, and I remember at that point thinking, like, I should probably tape a couple of songs. But then I remember, like, oh no, this is going to be on YouTube, and there's people doing this like semi-professionally with much better equipment. So I'll just enjoy the show live with my own eyeballs, and then I can watch it on YouTube for the rest of my life, and I'm going to win both ways.
Absolutely, because there's nothing like it. If you're there, you're watching on your phone. That's the same way you watched on YouTube. So get in the moment, feel the energy. You can feel that when that song, those guitar riffs come through and they hit you, and you're watching it. Oh, there's nothing like it. Nothing better than that for sure. All right, we're gonna throw 2 Gary songs on there now. Mark, go ahead with your Gary choice.
I would probably. I think I'm gonna go with. I'll probably just go with Fire in the Hole, because that one, it felt the most Van Halen, and I love Alex's drums in that song. Yes. I love just that pounding, thunderous sound. It's like a rolling thunder that he creates. It's not quite Hot for Teacher, but it's just his bass drumming of that is just next level. So I'll go Fire in the Hole.
That's a good choice. It's a good choice. I went through a bunch of these. This was a hard one for me, obviously, as well. I thought One I Want was probably one of the closest things we got to like a real, true Van Halen sounding song. I love the single. I love Without You. I thought that did really well, especially did in concert. They ended up tossing on the end like the Beatles track there at the end. The great harmonies there.
John Stepp was I think he was an assistant on that video, on the Without You video.
Really?
He told me that I was hosting Movie Talk, and somehow that came up. I mean, I was hosting Movie Talk, so of course Van Halen's going to come up. And Stepp was on the panel, and he mentioned that, and I was like, okay, we'll get back to the movie news in a minute. What did you just tell me?
Talk to me, Goose. Talk to me. At that point, for sure. But I think at the end of the day, I'm going to actually go towards a little bit more of the experimental one for me, because we have a lot of great rock songs in here. I'm going to go with Year of the Day. I just think that was a kind of a cool.
Year of the Day,
had a nice little like slow burn kind of thing. It's actually, I thought of it as like the spiritual sequel to Feelin' from Bound. Same kind of feel, some kind of slow burn feel, but like when they got to the moments, he had those really rocking moments. But had a lot of great Eddie experimental tones throughout. Not very speedy, not very like you're not going to have the Satriani or the all the pyrotechnics, I should say, of it. But it has kind of some cool sounds to it, and I think it's good to have something like that on a best of, in terms of you got a little bit of a break, not a break, but like a little bit of a pause, a little bit
It's
of.
got a good groove to it, and you can see the connective tissue in his guitar playing from balance to that, with
Right.
not just with feeling, but also like a deja vu, or
Yeah.
even like the instrumental, the Ballacterium. You can kind of see him progressing into some of the stuff, and I think Year to the Day is without use a pretty good example of it too. But
Yeah.
I mean, he just, you could see where his mind was going sonically.
Right.
And that's kind of where I think that's the sweet spot of Van Halen 3.
I agree, and I will say, to me, this is actually probably the most Gary sounds like himself in this
Yeah,
song.
right.
So I gotta like that pure tone for sure.
Yeah.
Well, that's gonna be our best of. We got Jump, Panama, Running with the Devil, Why Can't This Be Love, Can't Stop Loving You, Dreams, Unchained, Romeo Delight, Top of the World, 5150, Fire in the Hole, Mean Street, Feel My Love Tonight, Summer Nights, Right Now, and Year to the Day. Before we go, Mark, I'm going to ask you, are there any honorable mentions that you want to toss out there that we didn't get a touch on, something we could possibly, because I know, is there time to say we love these songs, even if we didn't squeeze them on? Anything you wanted to add song-wise?
Yeah, they're not known as the bangers from the great Van Halen monster era, but I think It's About Time, the song that they did with Sammy when they got back in the studio briefly in 2003, 2004, is a great song. And I'm also going to say one of my favorite songs, they rotate from A Different Kind of Truth. I'm going to put Out of Space on there, because that is just a slam dunk, fast-paced, kick-ass. It shares a lot of DNA with Romeo Delight. So check out Out of Space from A Different Kind of Truth.
Nice. Very nice. Okay, I got one from each era. I'll just toss up there. Actually, got two from the David era. I'll just touch really based on. They almost made my slots as well. Everybody Wants Some is a great party rock song. Also, the same vein, and The Cradle Rock kind of had that very Van Halen-esque, very David era stuff. For Sammy era, I want to throw in there again. I mentioned I'm a Softie, and this was the most pure, soft love power song there was, and that was Not Enough from Balance. I did not expect that to be a Van Halen song, but Eddie sits at the piano and Sammy croons his way through that. Oh,
watch them. Everybody YouTube that on Letterman, because they did a great performance of it on the David Letterman show, and they bring the house down.
Absolutely. It was a beautiful song. And the final one I'll throw out there for the Gary fans that are listening, I'm sure there's one or two of you out there at least. Once was a very interesting, unique experiment on Van Halen 3. Gary actually took that afterwards and did it with his bands as well. It was probably the most un-Van Halen-esque thing I heard on the album. But I really appreciate what they were doing, trying to experiment in a way. So kind of a cool thing there. But yeah, that's it, my friend. We did it. We kicked ass. We got a great set list. I'm going to put this up on Spotify. I'll share it publicly so we can have the one-offs best of Van Halen for sure. Any last statements from you, my friend?
No, I mean, just thank you for the opportunity, for the platform to just gush about this band that has just meant so much to me for so long. As I'm looking at all my Van Halen little collectibles, I'm not really a material possession guy that much. Like if the fire happens, I'm grabbing the dog and I'm fine with everything else, getting torched up. But I mean, I just have so much stuff, but in here, it's like where it really counts, and like right here, and I remember the day that Eddie passed, just getting in the car and Molly in the back seat, and we just drove around Southern California. I mean, we drove for a couple hours, and she was loving it. Her face was out the window, and we were just blasting Van Halen, and just there were tears, there was joy, it just ran the gamut of emotions. And if you wanted an Eddie Van Halen tribute concert, you should have just been in my Ford Fusion that day, because that's what it was. And it in that moment, I realized that even though Eddie's no longer with us, the music is always going to be there to do the things that I've always relied on it to do for me. It'll pump me up. It can mellow me out at points. It can tell me everything's okay. But more than anything, it just makes me happy. And that's what I want out of my entertainment. That's what I want out of my art. And no one has ever taken me higher on that mountain than the mighty Van Halen.
I agree. You never know how much you love somebody until they're gone. And there's few artists that really hit me like that, hit me hard. I can't even say Freddie did, because I was not really even a full Queen fan when Freddie passed. But in my time, the ones that really hit me, I could say David Bowie hit me when he passed. I could say that Taylor Hawkins did hit me when he passed. But Eddie was one of the big ones for me. And I did the same thing. I kind of went out to the car, said, Kim, you got to stay home for a little bit. I got to go driving. I just went driving, and I just pumped out best of. And I was like, damn, this is going to be with me the rest of my life at least. And I felt like And he's happy about that, and because that's what Eddie wanted. He wanted the music to outlive him, if anything else, and his music will outlive him forever. This is going to be it's such a timeless thing. Rock and music will go through phases. It'll be up, it'll be down, it'll be new songs, old songs, new bands, pop acts, metal acts. It's always going to be there as a stalwart of that classic time in my youth and in my growing adult era and everything else. So wonderful. And I also have to say thank you, Mark, for coming on board this show with me, getting to speak Van Halen with me. And honestly, guys, if you ever wanted to know, if you were ever at a Schmodown Live event and afterwards at the bar, if you saw Mark and I sitting at the bar or sitting at a table in a corner and wondered what we were talking about, you basically just got that conversation.
The only difference is that we got this one on tape. That's the only difference.
The only difference is you got to sneak a little listen in there. Yep. So good for you, and thank you so much again, Mark. Do you want to plug anything before you go?
I got some tour dates up at markellis.live. I hit Little Rock, I hit Denver, and then I will be in San Francisco coming up in a couple weeks, and I will be in Las Vegas this fall and a couple other ones. So just check markellis.live, and the social media is at markellislive. And if you really want to do me a solid, just crank up the greatest hits of Van Halen or listen to PLD's one-offs playlist.
There you go. It'll be good for your soul. You can find me, of course, at Paul_Denuzio on the old social media. You can find me all over this channel, of course, doing all sorts of things. Be PJ Campbell, bringing back Two Mediocre White Dudes on film very shortly. Us gushing over every sort of usually horror franchises, although we're starting with John Wick recently. It's not a horror franchise, but we just had to do it.
For dog lovers, that's a horror franchise.
That's a good point. That's a very good point. Okay, so it's still horror.
I rewatched the first one, and I forgot that his dog was a beagle, and I'm looking at Molly watching it. I'm like, honey, earmuffs, close your eyes, do not watch this part.
Fair enough.
I will turn into John Wick. I will turn into John Wick. Okay.
Absolutely, would turn into John Wick. It's the most believable motivation I've ever seen put to film.
We all felt it.
Exactly, all wanted it. This, of course, I do Holy Snokes, a Star Wars podcast with Matty Gunner, and a review with Lego where I talk about the V franchise, bunch of stuff. Just come check me out, subscribe, all that stuff. We'll have another one of these next month. I have a couple of irons in the fire. I got to talk base on. I'm not sure. Hoping I can get a little Mr. Ben Bateman to come on to do a little Tom Petty potentially.
Oh yeah.
Maybe Chris Clark to do a little Billy Joel. I'm kind of going to send some feelers out.
Yeah, get some folks with actual talent on this show.
That would be you indeed, my friend. Don't sell yourself short.
And tell Matty Gunner I probably still owe him a beer. So thanks, Matty.
Probably do. Good guy. He's a big fan of yours as well. Matty, really awesome dude. So, all right, that'll do it for us. See you next time on the channel, and see you next month. Hopefully, I'll let you know what it is as soon as I know. But until then, keep rocking, everybody, and take care. Bye now.